There are a number of individuals I'd like to thank who have been instrumental in bringing this evening to fruition. First off, museum staff member Coralie Shank deserves credit for the majority of the planning, coordination, and logistics for our event this evening. Other staff members, Nathan Bartle and Julie Robinson, and then all of the other staff members and all of our students are assisting in some capacity. So the folks that you've been seeing all evening are all staff or students that work at Kaufman Museum. I think we have one exception, an intruding other student who we love that she's here. Yes, let's give them a round of applause. I'd also like to thank Margie Weens of Remax Associates who lent us a truck. That's to transport the food and all the different supplies back and forth from the food service at Bethel College. That's provided by Lucy Johnson and her crew from Elior. It's a hard one to get out. Elior Food Service at Bethel College provided our food this evening, so thank you to them also. And of course, we are grateful to you, our guests. Your interest in the museum and support of our programs are essential. Donations through membership and events like this are crucial to the museum's day-to-day success, and we appreciate you making the choice to come be with us this evening. Before we move on to our scheduled speaker, we will pause for a musical interlude. For almost 4 years, two Bethel College students, Jacob and Timothy Schrag, or the Tall Schrags, because we can't always tell them apart. So the Tall Schrags have worked at Kaufman Museum. In all these years, they have been busy with musical performances, whether that's at Bethel College with the concert choir, or with Open Road at Bethel College, or with their sister at church or social events as the Schrag siblings. Really, for 4 years, I've been wondering when to invite them to perform for our museum guests. Really, they've been subtly working at the museum and doing all these things, and I keep thinking, oh my goodness, when are we going to have them perform? And tonight's the night. Help me welcome Jacob and Timothy Schrag.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy, for that introduction. Yes, I'm Timothy Schrag. This is my brother, Jacob Schrag. If you've seen us perform before, yes, we're most commonly with our older sister and like to call ourselves the Schrag siblings. So today you'll be getting 2/3 of the Schrag siblings. We're going to start with a piece that if you were at the last Life Enrichment on this last Wednesday, you might be familiar with. This is a tune called Old Ties and Companions by a band called Watch House. A little setup yet, so maybe I'll keep talking. So we really, this formal band thing's semi-recent, but it's been really fun for us to move around and be a part of this with our sister. She's sort of what holds it together, so watch out tonight. It might be a little risky without her here. We're excited to play for you. Now we're ready.
Breaking bottles in the yard never steal my mind again. Old ties and companions. sitting on the fence. Tunes we carry through the years will change. Man, that's just enough. Keep these ghosts around those haunted fields. Old ties and companions, you and I were just passing through. It's 100,000 miles of lonely track, holding back tomorrow. Someday I'll hop along and ride 'em home. Old ties and companions will never leave alone. Old man, give me endless time. Never let these ties sever. 'Cause heaven knows all this fooling around, these times won't last forever after all. Been traveling these wide roads for so long. My heart's been far from you, 10,000 miles gone. Oh, I wanna come near and give you every part of me, but there's blood on my hands and my lips are unclean. In my darkness I remember Mama's words reoccur to me. Surrender to the good Lord and He'll wipe your slate clean. Take me to your river, I wanna go. Go, take me to your river, I wanna know. Dip me in your smooth water as I go in, as a man with many crimes come up for air, as my sins flow down the Jordan. Oh, I wanna come near and give you every part of me, but there's blood on my hands and my lips are unclean. Take me to your river, I wanna go. Go, take me to your river, I wanna know. I wanna know, wanna know, wanna know. your river. I wanna go. Lord, please let me know. Take me to your river. I wanna go. All right, thank you. We've got one more for you. This one you might know. It's called 75 Septembers. In the year of the yellow calf, shadow of the Great World War, third kid Grandma had came into this world on a rolling farm in Maryland when Wilson was the president, and summer blew her goodbye through the trees. A child of changing times, growing up between the wars, and Fords rolled off their lines, and bars all closed their doors. And I imagined you back then with a snap-brimmed hat and a farmer's tan, when horses drew the wagons through the fields. Now the fields are all 4 lanes, and the moon's not just a name. Are you more amazed at how things change, or how they stay the same? And do you sit here on this porch and wonder how the time flies by? Or does it seem to slowly creep along? With 75 Septembers come and gone. Where the fields all gold and farm was the spring house dark and cool. Did the rooster crow at dawn when they got you up for school? And would you tell me once again the tales of Granddad's hired men, and how they drove the old dirt road to town? 'Cause now the fields are all 4 lanes, and the moon's not just a name. Are you more amazed at how things change, or how they stay the same? And do you sit here on this porch and wonder how the time flies by? Or does it seem to barely creep along? With 75 Septembers come and gone. With 75 Septembers come and gone. In the year of the yellow calf, shadow of the Great World War. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacob and Timothy. I know they headed out the door, but that was just lovely, and I'm so glad we got to hear them in a museum setting. So I'll have to tell them again when they can hear me, because they're on the other side of the door. Our program this evening is being held in conjunction with the special exhibition, Voices of Conscience, Peace Witness in the Great War. The Voices exhibit will be at the museum, at Kaufman Museum, through May 2026, with a complete program series this coming spring. I hope you've had a chance to see the exhibit and that you'll come back again or see it for a first time. There's a lot to absorb in the exhibit, and it's worth a number of visits. This evening, we have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Susan Schultz Huxman. Susan recently retired from her position at Eastern Mennonite University, where she served as president for 9 years. She was EMU's first female president and first academic president to reach the rank of full professor. Prior to EMU, Dr. Huxman was president at Conrad Grebel University and served in administrative positions at Wake Forest University and Wichita State University at the Elliott School of Communications. Clearly, Susan's professional credentials are impressive, but what I'm most excited about letting you know is that she is a campus kid, a Bethel College campus kid, grew up right here in North Newton, and graduated from Bethel College. Who would have thought that we could find a speaker for our dinner that grew up right here and can speak to the exact topic of our current special exhibition? That is just a wonderful coincidence. Susan's academic field of study is communications. Her doctoral dissertation examined ways in which Mennonites, as a marginalized group during World War I, wrestled with separation and assimilation in novel and disarming patterns. This is a topic she will delve into this evening. Please help me welcome Dr. Susan Schultz Huxman as she presents Speaking in Defense of the Marginalized.
Well, good evening, everyone. It is wonderful to be here. What a lovely program and dinner and a wonderful reception with adult beverages, no less. Times have changed for the better, I might add. I do want to thank Andrea Schmidt-Andres for the invitation to speak with you tonight. She has been fabulous. It is absolutely wonderful to be back here at my alma mater for this important fundraising event for the Kaufman Museum and Bethel College. For the past 15 years as a college president at 2 universities, this was a top task for me, a ministry, really, to raise friends and to raise funds for the university to ensure a vibrant future. And as the scriptures remind us, the Lord loves a cheerful giver. And any gift, regardless of size, is twice blessed. We often don't think about how the very act of giving is also a gift to the giver. But many studies have shown, many of you know this, many studies have shown that people who are generous tend to have better health overall, and that there is a positive association between helping others and life expectancy. So a shout out to all of you for giving generously tonight and giving a boost to your own health in the process. And a shout out to the Vice President of Advancement at Bethel, Pam Thiessen, and her team, including Andy, for bringing so many joyous givers together tonight. My presentation this evening features all 3 of my scholarly interests in the field of rhetoric. And the field of rhetoric is defined as the study of all the processes by which people influence each other. So first, I have a scholarly interest in the study of subversive rhetoric, or protest rhetoric, that involves speaking truth to power in ways that disrupt and provoke and confound. Second, I have a scholarly interest in an exemplar case of the delightful paradox of a funny word called identification. Identification is a concept central to all of rhetoric, which means how we use words and sounds and images to seek both similarity and difference with others. Or to put it another way, how do our rhetorical efforts to influence others strive for both a kind of segregation, separateness, and a kind of congregation, togetherness, at the same time? And third, I have a scholarly interest in unusual cases, underdog stories, if you will, that defy traditional rhetorical norms of how marginalized people draft damage control messages to restore tarnished images in the midst of tumult and crisis. Of course, I'm talking about the Mennonites and the way in which this quiet in the land people launched a rather sophisticated PR campaign to defend themselves in World War I. I first became fascinated with Mennonites as rhetorical creatures right here at Bethel College. It was the experience of a Mennonite history class, a class I really didn't want to take as part of a January interterm, but what a course it became. It was a course taught and facilitated by Jim Youngke. Jim, you are here tonight. Would you please stand? Aren't you here? This was a course you may remember was taught up in the chapel, the third floor. At that time, we didn't have heat, and it was January, and it was a good place to learn about the troubles of the early church. It was facilitated by Jim, but there were many, many guest presenters, including one of my all-time favorite professors right here at my table. I'm so honored and humbled she is here tonight after losing Doug. Raylene Penner, stand up. She didn't just teach English. She taught stories. She taught storytelling. And what I've learned about the power of storytelling comes from Raylene. The final unit of that course that Jim facilitated was American Mennonites and War, and it made an indelible impression on me. The course culminated with a film that celebrated Mennonites' steadfast devotion to faith in the face of war. And the only note that I took that day was a statement made by its narrator, a Mennonite historian. He said, "War is good for Mennonites. It brings out their best." Scribbled in the margin, I wrote, "What? You gotta be kidding." 8 years later, I wrote a dissertation for my PhD in communication at the University of Kansas that explored that very subject. And I have been writing and publishing about various aspects of peace rhetoric, protest movements, crisis communication, and the Mennonite witness in World War I ever since. The picture here, by the way, is of Jim speaking in Kansas City on the 100th anniversary of the Mennonites in World War I in 2017 as part of a special session, Remembering Muted Voices, Conscience, Dissent, Resistance, and Civil Liberties in World War I. It was hosted by the National World War I Museum and Memorial in Kansas City. So I'd like to share with you briefly some inspiring examples of self-defense rhetoric from Mennonite writers and speakers, specifically from, of course, the Mennonite crisis of citizenship during the Great War. Because from these men and women of faith, we see unusual countercultural rhetorical patterns of self-defense that really defy the standard strategies to repair one's image that you find in a classic crisis consultant's manual. You see, Mennonites chose a very, very different approach to crisis, one that does not seek to respond to accusation by peddling in manipulation for the purpose of winning. In that sense, it is truly a nonconformist, subversive approach to purifying an image, akin to how Jesus plays the exemplar apologist in John 8. And I'm going to read this for you, the whole text, because I think it's important. Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives, but early the next morning he was back again at the temple. A crowd soon gathered, and he sat down and talked to them. As he was speaking, the Jewish leaders and Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery and placed her out in front of the staring crowd. "Teacher," they said to Jesus, "this woman was caught in the very act of adultery. Moses' law says to kill her. What about it?" They were trying to trap him into saying something that they could use against him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. They kept demanding an answer. So he stood up again and said, "All right, hurl the stones at her until she dies. But only he who never sinned may throw the first." Then he stooped down again and wrote some more in the dust. And the Jewish leaders slipped away one by one, beginning with the eldest, until only Jesus was left in front of the crowd with the woman. I share this story of Jesus' encounter with the adulteress and Jewish leaders and Jewish law in its entirety because many of you will recognize that this is a common rhetorical pattern for how Jesus responds to challenges from skeptics throughout the New Testament. Encounter after encounter with the Pharisees, the Sadducees, with Pilate. Jesus turns the tables on challenges by his accusers. Jesus does not use any of the strategies that you could find in a crisis consultant's manual, such as, and I'm quoting now, "When faced with an impossible dilemma of any magnitude, consider one of the following strategic maneuvers: counterattack, change the subject, cover your assets, equivocation, and plea for sympathy." In this particular parable, Jesus' defense utilizes none of these manipulative resources. Rather, he uses the resource of paradox. It is at once an engaging and disengaging encounter. He stands up to address the Jewish leaders, but not before a long pause where he stooped over, drawing in the sand, and then he returns to that pose. He affirms the law, and he challenges the law. Yes, stone her, but only you who is without sin may cast the first. How did Mennonites use this nonconformist approach for handling charges that they were un-American for not fighting a war to save democracy? The seeds of paradox as a model for defending the faith are actually found in the Schleitheim and the Dordrecht Confessions of Faith. "Be ye in the world, but not of it." A passage from John 17 comes from the Dordrecht Confession of Faith in 1632. The sword is an ordering of God, but outside the perfection of Christ. That comes from the Schleitheim Confession of Faith in 1527. Mennonites defended their position of non-resistance using these resources. They crafted an unusual countercultural model of self-defense. So let's turn to what the Mennonite rhetorical crisis was in World War I. What were their central rhetorical challenges? Well, they had at least three major strikes against them. Strike one. This was the mother of all wars. There was no escape. National conscription was passed into law for the first time in this country in the last war that Mennonites could remember, and that would have been the Spanish-American War of 1898. Mennonites were spared from having to deal with a national conscription law. Strike two. America discovered the power of propaganda. This war used advertising to create an intense, unifying militaristic patriotism in America for which there was no comparison. Here are some of them. Buy Liberty bonds for wife and child, for hearth and home, for freedom. Support Uncle Sam enlist today. Oops, you told me that would happen. Travis, thank you for that. Use the American language, not the English language. And and this was true even in post offices, didn't say speak the English language, speak the American language. And businesses did the same kind of thing. This sign appeared frequently, and I think you can imagine why they were there, particularly in German-speaking communities. They were aimed at German Americans, including the Mennonites, who preferred to speak German before the war. And if you didn't speak the American language, what was your fate? You're an unwelcome, hyphenated American, and worse, you're a coward, a slacker, a parasite, and especially pro-German. Pictures and political cartoons like this were frequent in the U.S. press, in the national, regional, and local newspapers. The third strike against the Mennonites was that they were not known as charismatic leaders, or savvy public relations people, or shrewd lobbyists. They were, after all, known as the quiet in the land, and Mennonite pastors during the war said this very thing. They said, "We do not have gifts for this sort of thing." And usually it's 3 strikes and you're out. And yet Mennonites were not quite out. What did they do to defend themselves? What did their damage control campaign look like? First of all, it may surprise you that they did have a damage control campaign, but they did, and that is because the Mennonites in 1917 America were of a different sort. In 1917 in the U.S., Mennonites numbered around 80,000. They were still a Christian conservative people who practiced non-resistance and nonconformity, and yet these Mennonites were quite different from their European ancestors in other respects. By the turn of the century, Mennonites began to show signs of mainstream denominationalism. They had become acculturated to the American way of life, and they saw themselves as American citizens. So for the first time, Mennonites professed that they could be both faithful church members and loyal American citizens. Now, before the war, that didn't seem to be much of a problem. After the war, when loyalty to country could only be defined as support of the war, this double identity became almost impossible. So it is from this growing acculturation context that any thinking of a PR campaign could arise. And out of the dozens of Mennonite groups in the U.S. in 1917, I studied the rhetoric and the rhetorical patterns of the 2 largest groups, the Mennonite Church, informally called the Old Mennonites, who came from Switzerland in the 1700s and primarily were located in the East, and the General Conference, who came from Russia in the 1800s and primarily located in the West. I have advanced the premise in my scholarship that their joint campaign, the MCs and the GCs together to defend themselves, consisted of 3 parts. First, Mennonites formed a lobby on Capitol Hill within 2 weeks of America's entrance into the war. This was a shocking departure from the low-profile and apolitical role of their forebears. 4 committees were formed: the Citizenship Committee, the Committee on Information, the Committee of 7, and the Committee of 7 was impressive. I wish I could just do a whole thing on them, and the War Problems Committee. These committees were spearheaded by emerging PR specialists from our Mennonite colleges, publishing houses, farmers, lawyers, business owners, newspaper editors, ministers, and even a state senator, the likes of such as J.S. Hartzler, an ordained minister and Bible professor at Goshen College, Aaron Laux, an ordained minister and founder of the Mennonite Publishing House in Scottsdale, Pennsylvania. S.K. Mosselman, president of Bluffton College. P.H. Rickard, teacher at Bethel College. J.W. Cleaver, president of Bethel College. H.P. Crable, newspaper editor in Kansas. Maxwell Kratz, a lawyer from Philadelphia, and Peter Jansen, a rancher and state senator from Nebraska. This is the range of people from across the U.S., from both the MCs and GCs, that said, we're going to put a team together and we're going to make our defense. And these Mennonites defended the faith. They abandoned their insular low profile and literally besieged Washington with letters and petitions pleading for the legal acknowledgement of conscientious objection. So that was the first strategy. They went to Capitol Hill, formed committees, and besieged Washington with letters. Second, these Mennonite crisis communicators adopted a shrewd sense of place, understanding how to diffuse conflict by where they engaged their accusers. They negotiated a clever strategy to diffuse the conflict with government officials by encouraging Mennonite boys to register and report to camp. Even though no provisions had been made in 1917 for non-combatant service, Mennonites simply might have refused to enter a military system that had no definite policy for non-resistors. But Mennonite men mostly did report to camp. For in reporting to camp, Mennonites helped the government meet their goal of getting all American draftees through the draft boards as quickly as possible. And in bowing to the demands of the government in this situation, Mennonites had a better opportunity to make exemption demands later. The third rhetorical pattern, Mennonites waged a rhetorical battle on two fronts to preserve their double identity as Americans and as Mennonites. And this both-and response to crisis was complicated and confounding. It was non-traditional and transformative. They used the church press to show members of the faith how to remain faithful Mennonites in the face of this unrelenting pressure. And so, in other words, one of the prevailing rhetorical patterns was aimed at strengthening the faith. Rhetoric in the church press relied heavily on strategies of separation, distinctiveness, religious purity, and even appeals to martyrdom. Mennonite writers also published pocket-sized tracts of biblical passages of non-resistance for drafted boys to memorize, carry in their wallets, and use at draft boards. And this is one of those. Again, pocket size, fits in a wallet, size of a baseball card. And it said things like, and I'm reading from that particular looks like an original card, again, from our archive library here. This is the kinds of things that they encourage Mennonite draftees to learn and to memorize and to say. All they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Love your enemies. Bless those that curse you. It is better to die a martyr's death than give up a faith in biblical non-resistance. They also shared photos of how brave and steadfast their Mennonite drafted boys were in camp, signing up, for instance, slop bucket duty rather than target practice. But they also used the church press to show members of the faith how to be loyal Americans in these difficult times. And this rhetorical pattern emphasized unity and similarity and assimilation. Mennonite writers said things like, "We realize that it is difficult for the government to deal with people like us. Since we cannot serve in the armed forces, we can help our country in so many other ways." Remarkably, some of the most insistent coverage of the patriotic American theme could be found in the German Mennonite publication, Der Herald. Here is one example. 2 weeks after America entered the war in April, a prominent editorial drawing showing how farmers were patriots in providing food for the war and every bit as important as the soldier on the battlefield. And the church press was also the place for arguing why it was important to suspend speaking German in some places. Other efforts to show the loyal American theme were repeated pleas to encourage contribution and even participation in the Red Cross, especially among the GC Mennonites. Here is a photo of Mennonite women volunteers to the Red Cross right here in Newton, Kansas, at the train station. These contrasting rhetorical responses, one was seeking separation from the larger world, the other was seeking assimilation with the world, created a third merged rhetorical pattern, a both-and appeal. In the same breath, Mennonite bishops said, we can be both patriotic citizens and religious pacifists. Perhaps the most dramatic, paradoxical way in which this both-and stance came together is in this photo. Here we have a photo of some Mennonite men who reported to camp who agreed to wear the uniform. They agreed to march under a drill sergeant, but carry brooms, not guns. And this is truly one of my favorite images in terms of its inventiveness and clever demonstration of protest. And here's one story of conviction and courage from the World War I defense that puts the Mennonite nonconformist self-defense stance in sharp perspective. It's been called the flag story, and it features a Mennonite minister and farmer from Whitewater, Kansas, named Bernard Harder. This story takes place on the Bernard Harder farm near Whitewater, a rural farming community, in April of 1918, at the height of U.S. involvement in World War I. A mob decided to go to the home of Bernard Harder, local Mennonite minister, and force him to put up a flag. Harder received a tip that this disgruntled group was coming, and he strode out to meet the group on the steps of his porch after watching the parade of local citizens make their way up his property. The mob angrily demanded that he put up an American flag. Harder agreed. Then he asked some technical questions about the proper way to mount and fly the flag. Did anyone bring a flagpole? No. Well, if you fly a flag, doesn't it need to be properly cared for? Taken down each night. One man from the group, clearly irritated by the delay, said, just hang it with nails. Harder said, won't the flag rip off in the Kansas wind? The reply, it doesn't matter. So the flag was mounted on the rafters of the porch with nails. Then one man shouted, let's sing. Let's sing America. Harder readily joined in. In fact, he continued to sing the other verses of the song. Since the mob knew the words of only the first verse, he was the only person singing all 4 verses. Embarrassed, the mob retreated from his property. I think you can see the lessons from the flag story. The flag story disarms the opposition in much the same way Jesus' story with the adulteress does. Just as Jesus' accusers silently leave when pressed with Jesus' words, Harder's accusers are at first baffled by his willingness to hang a flag and engage them on proper respect for handling a flag, and then silenced when they could not sing more than one verse of a patriotic song, and they too slipped away one by one. The flag story also underscores the importance of where to address your adversary in order to minimize conflict. I think it's important that the mob encounter does not take place in the minister's church or the town square, nor even inside the minister's home, but rather on the steps of his porch. In all likelihood, this minister would not have acquiesced to hanging a flag in his church, nor would the mob have retreated in silence, leaving the minister singing, had they been surrounded by onlookers in the town square. So finally, I want to share with you what the response was overall to the Mennonite public relations campaign to restore their image in the wake of damning accusations regarding their disloyalty to their country. The response by the American public, while sympathetic in some quarters, was mostly negative. The American public unleashed scathing indictments against Mennonites and other pacifists, using the nation's newspapers, and verbal humiliation gave way to physical abuse in some Mennonite communities, especially during Liberty Loan drives. The response among members of the faith was, on balance, quite positive. In adopting a very broad rhetorical stance, Mennonite rhetorical efforts allowed members of the faith to adopt different responses to the war. Some contributed to the Red Cross and even Liberty Loan drives and flew the American flag. Others did not. Some wore the uniform in camp, others did not. Some carried a gun, others carried a broom. Despite the diversity of positions taken, the faith as a whole maintained enough solidarity to avoid a split or lose members. It's rather remarkable when you consider that denominations split over much less these days. And the response by the government, their primary outside audience, was truly mixed. Mennonites did not win their plea for finding service to country outside the military arm of the government. 138 Mennonites were court-martialed for refusing any form of non-combatant duty. And yet, the Wilson administration did endorse one of their farm furlough programs and called off the espionage violation surveillance against them. The government's middling response could best be described by the Secretary of War himself, and yes, it was called the Department of War back then, not the Department of Defense. After meeting with Mennonite negotiators, Newton Baker, Secretary of War, said this: "As long as they don't number too many, these Mennonites do not pose a threat." It was he who recommended that the Wilson administration call off the surveillance. Another leading war administrator, Walter Kellogg, who supervised draft board hearings across the country, said this: "The Mennonites, they remain a curious and an alien survival of an old world people, an anachronism amidst the life of today. They're harmless." Mennonites never aspired to win over the American public. They aimed to be authentic peace advocates to each other. They aimed to balance their gratitude for American freedoms and their American citizenship with their greater allegiance to their faith, their church, and their communities. Their goal was not to be judged rhetorically effective by non-Mennonites, but to be judged as persistent, patient followers of the Prince of Peace. These are all pictures, by the way, of COs, many of them Mennonites, at Camp Funston, right here in Kansas. Certainly a peculiar name for a war camp, I think. In short, the Mennonite World War I story, from a rhetorical perspective, was a crucible of citizenship and faithfulness that they largely survived. It was a nonconformist story, a protest story, a story of identification, both its separation and similarity appeals, a story of faithfulness to the Jesus that we find in Scripture when confronted by accusers, a story of rhetorical underdogs who, facing considerable odds as a quiet of the land people, courageously managed to throw out the predictable script for how to handle crisis and engage in an authentic and nonconformist rhetoric of transformation, a both-and approach to be in the world, but not of it. So thank you for your time and engagement with me on what I think is an incredibly fascinating topic. I appreciate it. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I realized I didn't ask Susan if she was willing to take questions, but yes, she is. So thank you so very much. And we'll open it up to the audience if you have questions. Where was that hand? Right here?
I'm curious how the Quakers were treated.
Pardon, can you say that again?
I'm curious how the Quakers were treated during World War I and II.
Yes, while I didn't study specifically the Quakers, I can tell you that particularly when the first response soon after war was declared, and the public relations committees were formed by the Committee of Information, Committee of Seven. When I looked at the minutes of their meetings, which are fascinating in their own right, they said time and time again, well, the Quakers are really ahead of us on this. They've already done their homework, and let's take a look at what they're doing and see what we can do. And in fact, part of the farm furlough program that they did put together was based a lot on what the Quakers had already done. So yes, I mean the violence, and it was very real and very sobering across the country, particularly during Liberty Loan drives, was not just against the Mennonites, but against Quakers, even political COs, not just religious COs. But that would be a fascinating chapter to look at. Were the Quakers really ahead? I don't know.
I would just like to identify Reverend Harder. He was a minister of the Emmaus Mennonite Church. He's the grandfather of the late Willis Harder. And so he was a tremendous witness in the Whitewater community.
You know, that's a really fascinating story, and as a good scholar, I do want to give credit to a fellow student of mine, but also a peer of mine here at Bethel. Mark Unruh wrote a fascinating article about that story in Mennonite Life in the early 2000s. And so he verified, like, how do we know about all these little transactions? We know of events, and this mostly comes as the story mostly comes as an eyewitness from his 16-year-old son, who was almost like a journalist writing it out, and then this, and then this, and then this. And so I want to shout out to Mark Unruh for providing that piece of verification, if you will, for how that all went down. Yeah.
Up here, Nathan.
What strikes me, and possibly many of us, are the parallels between today and then. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, there are parallels. There are also, some striking differences, but certainly as we have become far more militaristic, saber-rattling, isolationist. These were all themes that led up to World War I. We have Mennonites taking a variety of different positions, some embracing that, others, of course, distancing themselves, and then others sort of taking more of a wait-and-see attitude. It's a very disorienting time. It was for Mennonites, before America's entrance into the war, and certainly during it as well. And I think we're experiencing that now. When I speak to in churches, and we get on to this particular topic about how is the Mennonite faith going to stay together in terms of unifying ourselves around the essentials, what I hear from particularly young mothers is they're very worried that the draft will come back. And that was the incredible challenge in World War I, is that national conscription had not been a thing anywhere before, and so there weren't models for how to deal with that. And while we have models now, it's a threat, and that's what keeps topics like this, I think, so relevant, because we do need to be able, as any good historian will tell you, we need to look back and learn from history. And if we don't learn from history, we're going to repeat our faults.
Bruce Boer. My grandfather grew up in the Freeman community and was a non-combatant. I have a nice picture of him in his uniform blowing his bugle. And I'm sorry that I never asked him more about his experience. But I was wondering if you could explain the mechanism by which they would register for the draft, they present, they would get their uniforms, but then somehow they were allowed to not be involved in training or shooting.
Yeah, it really was a patchwork quilt kind of existence. It's sort of like if you go across the border in Canada. I know this, having lived there for 6 years. It depends who you get at the border, as to whether or not you got to unload all your belongings, or whether you get a high five and we'll see you later. So each camp operated a bit differently. But what the bishops and Mennonite pastors and Mennonite church leaders said, both from the MCs and GCs. Not everybody complied, but most of them did, to say, hey, let's go and register here. We're going to give you some information to say this. We are religious pacifists, and that's what this means. We have a faith of 400 years old, and we practice this in, so they would ask a lot of questions at the draft boards. And sometimes they were able to do non-combatant work like slop bucket duty, and other times the drill says, no, you're going to have to carry a gun, and you're going to have to do all of this, and they were treated really quite poorly. Some of them, having to go off into the barracks and then not eat for a week. So there wasn't a uniform way in which anybody who was a religious, conscientious objector was going to get these series of treatments. So it was a really tough time. One of the things that was incredibly valuable, I think, to Mennonite boys and men who were drafted, is that bishops and pastors could make regular visits to the camp, and that's when they would pray together. They would have Bible study together. They would take pictures. They'd come back to the congregations and say, "I've seen your sons. They're holding up pretty well. Let's send prayers and letters." So, without that kind of intervention, it could have been a very different story. So they at least were allowed into the barracks, or into the camp.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Susan. To learn the details behind the broader story is just a wonderful thing. So thank you so much for coming tonight and speaking. And hope you enjoy retirement.
Yes.
So thank you.
I'm a month into retirement, so it's feeling good.
Okay, that brings our evening to a close. I do want to mention the next event that we'll have at Kaufman Museum. That will be November 30 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We will have German Christmas carols. Our three presenters are here, so Christmas sing-along in German, and Doctors William Esch, Karen Schleba, and Merle Schleba will be the ones leading that afternoon. So we hope we can see you there. And with that, thank you. I hope you arrive home safely and have a good weekend.